Ghost Blimp, The Mystery of the L-8, August 16th, 1942, Sunday morning. While much of the United States is still asleep, the coast of Northern California is waking up to a world that feels submerged. The San Francisco fog isn't just a weather pattern. It is a thick, wet weight that clings to the skin and smells of salt, heavy oil, and the cold metal of the Pacific. It is a morning of absolute gray, where the line between the sky and the sea has been completely erased. Inside the cavernous darkness of Hangar B at Treasure Island, two men are preparing for a flight that, by all accounts, should be entirely forgettable. Ensign Charles Cody and Lieutenant Ernest Adams are the men assigned to the mission. They are not rookies. They are seasoned professionals who understand that in the summer of 1942, the stakes for a coastal patrol are higher than they have ever been. Lieutenant Adams is a veteran with thousands of hours in the air, a man who knows the temperament of the Pacific winds. Ensign Cody is his steady, capable counterpart. Their craft is the L-8. It is a 150-foot silver bubble, a non-rigid airship designed to do exactly one thing: hover over the freezing waters of the Pacific and hunt for Japanese submarines. To the men who fly them, these blimps are vital. To the public watching from the shore, the L-8 is just a silent, silver shape, a giant whale of a machine dissolving into the mist. The clock in the gondola reads 6:03 a.m. as they lift off. The twin engines hum with a steady, rhythmic drone that vibrates through the floorboards of the small cabin. As the L-8 gains altitude, the ground disappears. The military base at Treasure Island, the lights of the city, and the jagged coastline are swallowed by the gray. For the first hour, the flight is textbook. The two men settle into their seats, surrounded by the smell of hot oil and the cold dampness of the morning air. They are hunters, waiting for a single dark shape beneath the waves that should not be there. At 7:38 a.m., the silence of the radio at the base is broken by the voice of Lieutenant Adams. His voice is steady, professional, the sound of a man who has done this 1,000 times before. He reports an oil slick near the Farallon Islands, a cluster of rocky teeth jutting out from the ocean about 30 miles from the Golden Gate. He tells the base they are dropping down for a closer look. It is a standard update. It is a routine moment in a routine war. It is also the last time anyone on Earth will ever hear them speak. As the L-8 descends, she is not alone. Two ships are in the area, a Liberty ship and a fishing trawler. The crews of both vessels stop what they are doing to watch the silver giant come down. They see the L-8 hover just 30 feet above the cresting waves, circling the dark, iridescent stain on the water. The observers are close enough to see the shapes of two men inside the glass-walled cabin. Everything looks normal. There is no smoke trailing from the engines. There is no erratic movement. There are no frantic signals from the pilots. The men inside are doing their jobs, peering down at the water, perhaps checking for the telltale wake of a submarine. After a few minutes, the blimp finishes its inspection, puts its nose up, gains altitude, and climbs back into the heavy ceiling of clouds. But the L-8 does not return to base. For the next 3 hours, the craft ceases to be a Navy airship and becomes a ghost. It is no longer being steered, it is being taken. The wind, a light breeze that should have been harmless, begins to push the massive silver shape toward the California coast. The L-8 is spotted several times during this silent journey. A Pan Am pilot sees it drifting aimlessly. Fishermen look up and see the silver belly of the beast passing over them. Hikers on the cliffs stop to watch what looks like a giant, peaceful whale floating home. None of them have any way of knowing that the cockpit is already empty. The men who had been visible just an hour before have vanished, as if they had walked through a door into another world. As the blimp nears the Golden Gate Bridge, its altitude begins to fail. The helium inside the massive bag is cooling, causing the skin to wrinkle and the entire structure to sag. Near the rugged cliffs of the shore, the L-8 strikes the rocks with a jarring impact. The collision is violent enough to knock a 300-pound depth charge loose from its rack. The heavy explosive tumbles down the cliffside and into the surf below, though by some miracle it does not detonate. Suddenly lightened by the loss of the weight, the L-8 surges back into the sky. It is no longer the proud, sleek hunter that left Treasure Island that morning. It is a sagging, dying animal. It is bent in the middle now, the internal pressure failing, the fabric folding and wrinkling like a piece of paper being crushed. It drifts over the city of San Francisco. People look up from their Sunday morning coffee and see a nightmare. The engines are dead. The only sound is the whistling of the wind and the terrifying hiss of the heavy metal grounding cables as they drag across rooftops. These cables snap chimneys and pull down power lines, sending showers of blue sparks into the quiet streets of the suburbs. Finally, the L-8 settles. It hits a street in Dolly City, wedging its silver body between two houses. The nose of the gondola comes to rest on a parked car. Within seconds, police and neighbors rush to the wreck. They arrive with fire extinguishers and medical kits, expecting to find the aftermath of a disaster. They expect to pull injured, bleeding men from the wreckage. Instead, they find a door that is latched wide open. As the rescuers peer into the cabin, they are met with a scene of impossible order. 2 flight hats are sitting undisturbed on the dashboard. A briefcase full of classified Navy documents is right where it should be. The radio is still humming, its frequency still tuned to the base at Treasure Island, waiting for a voice that will never come. The engines were switched to the on position. The parachutes are still tucked into there. Rex, the life raft, is untouched. There are no men. There is no struggle. There is only the ticking of a hot engine and the sound of the Pacific wind moving through a vacant seat. Cody and Adams are gone. The flight of the L-8 has ended, but for Charles Cody and Ernest Adams, the silence has only just begun. The L-8 sat wedged between the two two suburban houses in Dolly City like a discarded toy from another dimension. As the sun began to burn through the remaining layers of the San Francisco fog, the initial panic of the residents was replaced by a cold, official scrutiny. The Navy investigators who arrived on the scene were men of logic, men of the sea and air who believed that every problem had a mechanical cause and every disappearance had a physical trail. But as they stepped into the gondola of the L-8, the logic of the 20th century began to fail them. The first thing the investigators noted was the chilling state of the cabin's interior. In a mid-air emergency, one expects to see the frantic evidence of a struggle for survival. They expected to see maps scattered across the floor, chairs overturned, or perhaps a fire extinguisher ripped from its bracket. Instead, they found a scene of domestic stillness. Two flight caps sat side by side on the instrument panel, looking as though they had been placed there by men who intended to return in a few moments. A briefcase containing top-secret naval codes and coastal patrol data that was vital to the war effort remained exactly where it should have been. The radio was humming. It was still perfectly tuned to the frequency of the base at Treasure Island, waiting for a hand to press the transmitter. The engines were switched to the on position, their batteries still holding a charge, their fuel tanks still heavy with 4 hours of unused gasoline. The Navy immediately turned its attention to the most frightening possibility of 1942, a Japanese attack. The theory was simple and terrifying. Perhaps a Japanese submarine had surfaced silently in the fog near the Farallon Islands. Perhaps the crew of the L-8 had been lured down by a decoy, and the pilots had been snatched from the cabin by an enemy boarding party. But as the investigators looked at the silver skin of the blimp, this theory crumbled. There were no bullet holes. There were no tears in the fabric. A submarine could not have captured 2 men from a moving aircraft in the middle of a choppy ocean without leaving a single mark on the ship. Furthermore, the witnesses on the Liberty ship and the fishing trawler had seen the blimp climb back into the clouds after inspecting the oil slick. They had seen the shapes of the men inside long after the blimp had left the surface of the water. Then the investigation shifted to the freak accident theory. This was the most logical explanation left. Perhaps one of the men had spotted something unusual in the waves and opened the door to get a better look with his binoculars. If a sudden gust of wind had tilted the gondola, he might have slipped. His partner, seeing him fall, would have lunged to catch him, and both men would have tumbled into the gray void of the Pacific. It was a tragic, clean explanation until the investigators looked at the safety bar. In the L-8, a heavy metal pipe acted as a safety bar, locking across the open doorway to prevent exactly this kind of accident. When the rescuers found the blimp in Dolly City, that bar was not missing and it was not broken. It had been neatly retracted and stowed in its bracket. This was a deliberate act. Someone had to physically move that bar to clear the exit. In a moment sudden, violent turbulence, no pilot would take the time to neatly stow a safety bar before falling out of a door. As the days turned into weeks, the Navy expanded their search to every inch of the rugged California coastline. Coast Guard cutters sliced through the waves, and hundreds of men walked the beaches, peering into the tide pools and the jagged rocks. They were looking for anything a life jacket, a piece of clothing, or a single floating flight boot. The Pacific is a vast graveyard, but it usually gives something back. Yet, for the crew of the L-8, the ocean remained a vault. Not a single trace of Ensign Cody or Lieutenant Adams ever washed ashore. They had vanished as if they had walked through a door into another world, leaving their empty vessel to carry their final, silent legacy back to a confused public. By the time 1943 arrived, the Navy was forced to reach a conclusion that satisfied no one. The men were declared legally dead, but the case remained open in the minds of everyone who had stood on that Dolly City street. There were no signs of a mutiny. There was no motive for a staged disappearance. No money was missing, and both men had stable, happy lives. The carbon monoxide levels in the cabin were tested, but there were no leaks that could have disoriented the crew. The mystery wasn't just that they were gone, it was the way they had left. They had left their hats, they had left the secret codes, they had left the door open and the safety bar tucked away, as if they were stepping out for a walk on a Sunday morning. The Navy eventually deflated the silver bag of the L-8, repaired the damage from the rooftops, and returned the craft to service. But the airship was changed. It earned a grim nickname among the pilots, the Ghost Blimp. The men who flew it later claimed to feel a chill in the cabin, a sense that the space was still occupied by the two men who had flown into the fog and never come back. The L-8 continued to drift over American cities for several more years as a commercial icon for the Goodyear Company, but to those who knew its history, it was a floating monument to the unexplained. To this day, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy over the Golden Gate Bridge, the story is whispered in the halls of aviation history. It serves as a reminder that even in our age of constant surveillance, the world still holds pockets of absolute silence. It is a story of a routine Sunday morning that turned into an eternal mystery, the only time in history a ship has returned from a mission perfectly intact, while its crew dissolved into the gray. The ocean is deep, the fog is thick, and some stories are never meant to have an ending. Sleep well and stay curious.